It's 6 days to Christmas and less than 2 weeks to the end of the year. And here on Breakfast Central, we are going to be rounding up 2024 as well as exploring projections for 2025. Yesterday, the president presented his budget before the House, and that will form the crux of our conversation this morning. Welcome to Breakfast Central. I am Olive MOD.
Well, that's right. Yes, the president indeed made that groundbreaking presentation that got everyone standing on their feet and singing what presumably is the new Nigerian national anthem. Well, you would get to know what we're talking about in the course of our conversation today. I'm Joe Hansen, welcoming you to Breakfast Central. A lot has been happening, and it's our duty to bring it to you. Now, let's start off first with some of the stories that have made the rounds from midnight. The first one has got to do with the fact that a commissioner in Lagos State has taken it by strides to ensure that the street urchins you see across different areas in Lagos State are indeed, evacuated, taken away from the streets. Especially if you live along the Lekki axis, you'll find out that these boys are becoming numerous, or they're indeed increasing in numbers. And that's exactly what you have there. It said 27 persons, including 15 minors, involved in unlawful, movements here and there. Street begging. But it's very scary, Olive, for me. I can tell you categorically, you can see them running away because it's an exercise the commissioner has decided to take on to ensure that he gets them out of the streets. They seem to be pouring in. I like to use the word pouring in numbers, especially these days. Recently, I do recall that I saw one at the start of the year that lives not too far off before you get to the Ibadan Carnival bridge and so on. I can tell you categorically that that child whom I used to see as a little kid has indeed grown up, and now you have like his siblings. There's so many. This is a very good exercise and a good way to start Thursday's edition of Breakfast Central to say this is very necessary.
So I have a number of concerns. I definitely think that this is a laudable move, and this will not be the first time that they've tried to clear the streets of beggars. First of all, I think our problem would be, there's a myriad of problems. The fact that if you go to northern Nigeria, there's still people who believe in the Alamajiri system of government or system of education. And as such, to them, they would give an excuse as to say that, these children, this is part of their culture and this is part of their system. So I think that perspective will pose a challenge. That's one. Two, Nigeria's out-of-school children, we have almost 20 million out-of-school children, and it's unfortunate. I think the final thing would be, where would they put these children? Well,
the truth is, if you recall, during the Governor Babatunde Raji Fashola era, during his time, especially as governor of Lagos State, he initiated this same move, and he was able to clear Lagos and ensure that these beggars were not everywhere like we see them today. And that's exactly what was expected to be done during the Governor Ambode's time. But then again, we did see that it was during Governor Ambode's time that you had an influx of these street kids and, of course, urchins who have taken over the streets. Well, major routes raided included Awolowo Way up to Falamo roundabout, Ikoyo Zumbambadiwe Avenue, Lekki Road. It said it's in a bid to arrest and get rid of destitute and miscreants causing public nuisance in the areas. 27 persons, including 15 minors, involved in the unlawful act of street begging in the middle of vehicular traffic holdups were apprehended during the operation. All suspects will be transferred to appropriate government facilities in line with relevant enabling laws. I also recall that during that time, you also had, during Governor Fashola's time, what he did was there were trucks, because I witnessed it, there were trucks that once these street urchins, these street beggars were caught, you were being thrown into these trucks. First of all, they would find out where you're coming from. And coincidentally, most of them were coming from the north. And then you'll be transported back. There's also a clear indication that some of these, this street begging is also a cartel. It's a business.
Yes,
where, somewhere
they have their parents that send them, or people who pay them per day.
Exactly, per day.
Typically, I never give them money. If I have food to give the children, I'd rather give them food to eat. However, I think my other concern is, I don't know that we have child services, here to take care of these children. In the West, where a child is not being properly taken care of by the parent, social services will come and pick up the child, and you'll be certain that the child is at least reasonably taken care of. I don't know if we have provisions for that here in Nigeria and what the plan will be for these children.
Social service for how many children?
So that's my concern, as in when they pack them now to where? Are we going to open like create an internally displaced persons camp for them and start to provide for them to feed? But yes, I'm all for getting the beggars, street beggars out of the way. Sometimes I think about how, as life has become increasingly difficult for the average Nigerian, I wonder what life is like for these beggars. So I'm torn between, yes, it's important for us to get them out of the way because some of them have even been used as tools to cause robbery.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I feel compassion for them. But
well, for me, sorry, this morning I'm not going to say I feel compassion. I think we just need to get rid of it's high time we rework the system. I mean, there are countries where there's birth control.
That's still feeling compassion
there's
for them.
There's birth control and so on. Anyway, let's go to another sad story.
And let's talk of another set of children.
This was tragic. Very tragic. This happened just yesterday in Oyo State. What presumably was supposed to be a fun moment for children and, of course, the elderly ended up becoming something else. Well, it's got to do with the story of the Ibadan Children Fun Fair tragedy. The Oyo government mourns and also has deployed a rapid response team, which he did yesterday. You could see the crowd right there on the screen. Let's quickly announce that this is an amateur video, so reason why it's not that clear. We do hear that before the press could actually get there, it was indeed managed in sort of way. But just in case you're wondering what took place, let's tell you quickly that there was a stampede yesterday. The stampede occurred at private children's fun fair held at Bashoru Islamic High School, leading to the loss of 32 lives, mostly children and some others injured in the early hours of yesterday. Now, according to a statement by the state government, he said he was not involved. The state government was not involved in the planning. Neither was the Ministry of Health carried along in the private children's end of the year fun fair. Now, the sad part I read in the press release was that the state government mentioned this, and it said, the commissioner says parents who are concerned about the whereabouts of their children are urged to check the following medical facilities in Ibadan, where children affected were taken for proper medical attention with valid means of identification. There's Partners, Western Hospital, Bashoru, Ring Road State Hospital, Moli Specialist Hospital, University College Hospital, Olive.
Right.
Sad.
I mean, it's a really sad story. Now, the reports we have are that there was a party organized by Her Royal Majesty Naomi Shilekunla Ogunwusi, the former wife of the Ooni of Ife. And this was scheduled to hold on Wednesday at Islamic High School, Bashoru, Ibadan. And part of it was that they were to win 5,000 naira cash gifts and free meals. What if this doesn't tell you anything? It paints a picture of how hungry people are. For them to risk their kids' lives, I mean, and allow them go to a party that it is crowded, thousands of people, over 5,000. So the party was targeted at benefiting 5,000 children.
Yeah,
so my question is, for you to do an event that will cater to 5,000, not even 5,000 adults, 5,000 children, what plans were put in place? What plans, was there a medical facility? Were there, my goodness, what is this crowd?
You know, the truth is, this conversation is one we would have to buy out time to really discuss. Having a little experience in event planning for years, I can tell you that some of the checkers, the things you need to check is the number of persons you're expecting and making provisions for them. Provisions in terms of security, health, and so on.
And yes,
look.
There's so many things that could have gone wrong here.
Oh, my goodness.
Things like kids being kidnapped.
Oh, my goodness.
Getting lost in the crowd, stampede.
It was stampede.
People getting so overcrowded that they start to pass out because of heat. So there's so much that could have gone wrong. 5,000 children being catered to would have required an adequate amount of preparation. One that we do not know if this team, I mean, obviously, this team did not take into account. And it's really sad. Again, I did read that there were children who slept overnight at the party. Like I said, just like with the first story, this second story, again, points to the fact that there is poverty in the land. Because if there wasn't poverty, people will not send their kids in those numbers to go there because they're going to win 5,000 naira and they will get free gifts. What can they use 5,000 naira to buy?
This calls for a quick review of the governor says he's expecting a report to look intently at what took place, what went wrong, and at what time. It's very, very sad. I cannot imagine. There's a video I saw of a parent lifting her child. It was like basically looking at a lifeless body. You know what? That's it.
There were people that said that they would come in, like parents that they told that their kids fainted, only for them to realize that the kids didn't actually faint. They were pronounced dead on arrival. That's anyway. Any parent's nightmare, but our hearts go out to the parents who are mourning the loss of their kids, as well as to Oyo State and the whole nation. It's really the saddest story to start today with.
Anyway, talking about the next stories that we do have for you here, let's quickly also tell you that the president has arrived in Lagos after the budget presentation. He took the next flight and he's landed. Oliver said there's hunger in the land, but the president has said, don't worry, he has a new budget. It's called Restoration Budget. We'll talk about that in the course of the show today. But that's President Bola Tinubu arriving, duly welcomed by the governor of Lagos State. That's Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, alongside members of the executive and also, other members of the press and the likes. And thanks for staying with us here on Breakfast Central. Let's take a look at some of the stories making the headlines this morning. Let's start off in Oyo State, where the government has commenced investigation into a stampede that occurred at a carnival in Ibadan, the state capital. Many children were said to have died in the process, with Governor Seyi Makinde commiserating with the parents who have lost their children. The governor, in a personal message on X on Wednesday, said his administration has arrested the organizers of the program and will ensure that those responsible are prosecuted. He described the incident as a sad day for the Oyo State Government and the people of the southwestern state. The governor said his administration has taken steps to ensure no further deaths are recorded by deploying security agents to restore order at the venue. In the meantime, President Bola Tinubu is also in the news. He has approved the reconstitution of the executive management teams for 12 river basin development authorities across the country under the Federal Ministry of Water Resources. The appointments aim to bolster efficiency and drive the government's agenda for sustainable water resource management, agriculture, and infrastructural development in various regions of Nigeria. Each authority will oversee key water resource management and development projects in their respective zones, spanning multiple states. Highlights include of Ogun Osun River Basin Development Authority, comprising of Lagos, Oyo, Ogun, and Osun. Leading this team, by the way, is Honorable Odebumi Olusegun as the chairman. Let's also tell you that President Bola Tinubu has arrived in Lagos State for this year's Christmas and New Year holidays. Tinubu arrived at the presidential wing of the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, Lagos, at exactly 3:23 p.m. on Wednesday. Before departing Abuja, the president presented the 2025 Appropriation Bill to a joint session of the National Assembly for consideration and passage. And that's all the news we have for you this morning. Don't forget to join us at 9 a.m. for more detailed news as we bring it to you on a platter of gold. Stay with us. We do have more here on Breakfast Central. We've got a very deep conversation we'll be going into. But first, let's take this break. Welcome back. As 2024 comes to a close, we take stock of the accomplishments and failures of the President Bola Tinubu administration and its renewed hope agenda. Key policies include the removal of fuel subsidies and the unification of exchange rates, aiming to stabilize the economy. These measures, however, led to immediate challenges such as increased living costs and inflation, impacting many Nigerians as well.
Despite these hardships, the World Bank noted positive outcomes, including a reduction in the fiscal deficit and projected economic growth. The administration also prioritized budget implementation, tax reform, and security sector restructuring. However, public opinion on President Tinubu's performance remains mixed. While some Nigerians acknowledged the necessity of the reforms for long-term economic stability, others expressed concerns over the immediate hardships resulting from the process and the policies. We're joined this morning by the former Minister for Youth and Sports, Solomon Dalong. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Olive, good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We're also joined here in the studio by public affairs analyst Dayo Akintobi. It's good to have you.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's start from the studio and then we'll go to Mr. Dalong. Let's get your general sense of 2024, the budget of renewed hope. Do you think that it has renewed the hope for Nigerians, even as we look forward to a budget of restoration?
Well, it has renewed for some, and for some it has been status quo, and for some it's been regression. I mean, it's a mixed bag any which way you look at it. Some of the numbers are positive. I mean, our foreign reserve has gone up, and our trade balance of trade is up. And however, this is highly theoretical. These numbers seem to be academic. You see them on paper, you see them in the books, but they're not translating into reality for the average man on the street in Nigeria, who is still feeling quite a lot of pinch in his shoes and will not tell you that he sees any benefit. The average person on the street, if you ask him, has your life improved between May 29, 2023 and today? The average man will tell you, no, it hasn't. And that's an indictment, essentially, of these so-called reforms. Because the ultimate goal of any reform is to better the lives of the person the reforms are aimed at. So far, we haven't seen that happen.
All right, let's bring in Mr. Dalong as well to get your thoughts regarding this. I mean, do you share the same sentiment or you have a different perspective?
Well, I think the performance of the 2024 budget has been quite impressive. And I congratulate the president because I can see the impact of the budget on himself, the members of his government, and public officials. And I think that is what we mean by renewed hope. Because when you talk about renewed hope, it should be hope for those holding the gears of power and distributing the wealth of the nation. So I find it difficult to contradict them because they are renewing their hope. And I don't think they pretended that they were going to renew the hope of Nigeria. And that explains why, if you look at their attitudes in terms of their public roles when they perform traditional or constitutional ceremonies like budget presentation, you could see the renewed hope on their faces. They're living very happy. They're so excited that it's much for them to enjoy. But it's for themselves and not for Nigerians. So if you are assessing the performance of the budget, you have to use a bipolar approach. Where are the poor today and where are the beneficiaries of the renewed hope? The renewed hope wasn't an agenda that engages the poor. They were not taken into consideration. So you cannot assess the budget using them. So for me, I think I can see the renewed hope in the lives of the president. He's looking more stronger, agile. You look at the members of his government, the Senate president, the speakers. So congratulations to the renewed hope because they have been renewing their hope. But for Nigerians, hopelessness looms dead in their numbers every day. They are insecure. The economy is in doldrum. Everything is just going down the drain. And that is my opinion of the situation. So I approach it from two perspectives.
Wow. Okay, so I mean, we've seen the perspectives of Mr. Dayo and also Mr. Dalong, but let's look at the economic reforms so far. It's been neither here nor there. I'll try and see if we can get some of the graphics up there on the screen to look at how the budget had fared, or indeed is going to fare. Well, 2025, the presentation of the new budget, we've seen projected government expenditure, 47.90 trillion naira. I mean, just take a look at that. I just want to highlight that, government expenditure. Do you think, I'm going to go back to Solomon Dalong, do you think that the government, the present government, in its renewed hope agenda, has done more to curb spending in order to ensure that all Nigerians can actually feel the hope that they are preaching, especially with how expenditures are being curbed in government? Do you think they've done that?
You see, the tradition of budget presentation in government is like this. The president reviewed the performance of the budget in the previous year. It is that reviewer that sets the tune and agenda of the budget projection and the presentation. But if you look at what actually transpired in the National Assembly, it was complete diversion from, what over the years is recognized as budget presentation. When I was growing as a young person, the presentation of budget is quite significant to me because everything then was tied to budget presentation. And you could see that when the budget is presented, you will feel the economy, things change, things work. And so budget was significant to the lives of Nigerians. But the situation as it is today, especially under the Emiloko political economic principles, which more or less is translated to mean it is our turn. So it is our turn economic policies which is supposed to now introduce tax reforms that will try to snip lives out of the common people. I think the target basically of this renewed hope philosophy is to target the poor, right from the removal of the fuel subsidy, the unification of the currency, and then the proposed tax reform bills in the National Assembly and all other things that they have so far done. There is nothing much to talk about except that the poor had to buckle up. Those who will live to see the 2025 budget, fine. Those who will not see, then we wish them better lives in the great beyond. But there is nothing to hope for. Rather, hopelessness should be what Nigerians should look for. And it is quite unfortunate that that is how our government is now looking at how to run this country.
All right, we'll come back to still speak some more about 2025 budget presentation, but let's come back to 2024 for a bit. And then those would argue that we're not even quite done with 2024 because we still have a long way to go. And I want to bring in Mr. Dayo here in the studio, Mr. Akintobi. Let's talk about the strength of 2024. One of the things or policies that we seem to see that has raised a lot of dust, but also garnered a lot of praise for the president is the tax reformation bill. And, the tax reforms have garnered support, criticism from the northern governors who think it's not going to favor the region. So tell us about, what you think the strengths are. Let's see if we can make it not a situation of all doom and gloom. I know you had mentioned earlier some areas in which you think this current, the budget has performed well and the current administration has performed well. So let's look at the year 2024 in review. Do you think that tax reforms was a good idea, the tax reform bills? And what other areas do you think that this current administration did well in 2024?
I think any government worth its salt has to place its focus on the masses. I think that's the beginning point of any administration's policies. Because what percentage does the elite actually constitute? So I think policies that are geared towards alleviating the hardships of the masses should always be given priority. Now, in the tax reform bill, the one thing that struck me was the fact that anybody who's earning minimum wage or less, well, it's illegal to be less, but anybody who's earning minimum wage will not be charged income tax. I think that's a very good start because at 70,000 naira a month, even if your income tax rate, your PAYE is about 5%, that's 3,500 naira. If that 3,500 naira is left in the pocket of the average Nigerian worker, he probably could pay his transport fare for the entire month. That makes a significant difference. So to me, as soon as I saw that in the tax reform package, it won my support, at least for that aspect. I also then looked at what the northern governors were complaining about in terms of where products are actually consumed versus where the company that produces them is headquartered, who should be the one generating the VAT and all that. And I looked at it critically and I realized that any and every state can make a claim as to, oh, we produce this, but we don't benefit from it, or we benefit from this, we don't produce this. The issue, look, for example, like alcohol in the north, for example, that they say they don't consume it in the north, but they get benefit from the VAT. On the other hand, some of the raw materials by which alcohol is produced, sorghum, barley, wheat, these kind of things, some of them actually are produced in the north. And by virtue of the fact that they themselves are contributing something to the production of alcohol, shouldn't some of the revenue defer to them as well? So I think that if we quibble, if each and every person is nitpicking at every little aspect, there's nowhere in the country that can't make a claim to the fact that there's something that we're bringing to the table that we're not getting any revenue from. So I think ultimately, whatever model you use, whether it's a derivation, whether it is the notion of where the company is headquartered, I think an equitable distribution is what the new tax reform bill seeks to do. Yes, there are some areas that have shortcomings in it. I think probably the biggest problem was they put the cart before the horse. They should have gone round and consulted and had more town hall meetings, more debate, more negotiation. I also think the National Assembly fell down on the job because our parliament is where these negotiations and discussions should take place. I was absolutely horrified when I heard the senators say, give it to the governors and let them go sort it out and bring it back to us after. And I thought to myself, the National Assembly has abdicated its responsibility to the people. This is the people's parliament. They're the ones who are actually responsible for making sure that we get the right policies, that make sure that they hold the executive's feet to the fire, that make sure they interrogate everything. Their hallowed chambers are the locus for negotiation and reconciliation and compromise and ensuring that the Nigerian people, their interest is protected at all times. Our National Assembly is not doing that. It's falling down on the job.
They are singing.
Anyway, stop talking about singing. Let's see what took place yesterday during the 2025 budget presentation. The president had said that this budget presentation is called restoration. It's a budget of restoration. Let's see what took place as soon as the president was welcomed into the hallowed chambers, and then what also took place later on. Take a look.
My constitutional duties, and with unyielding commitment to rebuilding Nigeria towards ensuring that we remain steadfast on the journey to a prosperous future, I hereby present the 2025 budget to the joint section of the 11th National Assembly. I wrote 11.
Well, there you have it, things that happened. Anyway, let's come to you, Solomon DeLong. What's your take on what took place yesterday at the Senate? And do you think, like many have said, that we do have a rubber stamp Senate? What's your thought on that?
Well, people do not need to say. You see, you judge somebody by his conduct. And the National Assembly has not pretended that they are the legislative assistant of the president. They've not pretended about that. If you measure the statements of the Senate president at one time when there was a protest, he said, you can allow them to protest while we eat our chickens. And another time when they were sharing money for research, and They forgot that the mic was on. And he said you will receive some packages in your account. Then, they realized that, put the mic off. You will receive emails. So we have more or less a comedy assembly of people who thinks more about themselves and not of the country. So they have not pretended about it. And so I'm not surprised about what they did yesterday. They will even do worse than that. But let me quickly maybe join my brother in this issue of the tax reform to add that, look, the tax reform bill, to all intent and purpose, is just an attempt to lure Nigerians to believe that it is well intended. It isn't. It's just like the withdrawal of fuel subsidy. I mean, you cannot be talking about tax reforms without accountability. All the money so far realized from the withdrawal of fuel subsidy, where have they been spent? Have they been accounted for? Take a look at Abacha, who set up PTF, and the subsidy withdrawal was accounted for. You could see it. They've not accounted for what their economic policies, which they introduced over a year plus, or getting 2 years, they've not accounted for it. They're now talking about new tax reform bills. And the issue of exempting civil servants, small-scale businesses, all these are just an attempt to lure the people. They are just like a bite. Go and look at the increase. The proposed bill raised consumption tax from 7.5% to about 17%. Who are the victims? Who are targeted with that increase? The poor. So the bill cannot be well intended. When you come to the issue of the distribution, which is now an issue between the governors and the government, I don't want to go deep into it because they are quarreling about who will take custody of what they will share. So it's a fight, it's like a fight between two armed robbers as to who should take custody of the loot or robbery. So a sane policeman should not be involved in interrogating it. But the issue is that if you look at the fundamental principle of that bill, it ultimately targeted the poor because it's a consumption tax. And majority of the population of Nigerians who are living below the poverty line are the poor. They are over 80 to 85% of the population of Nigeria, and this particular tax bill targets them. So to me, I don't seem to see anything good in it because you are just going to now sniff the many lives in the poor people with the little they have to give them, again, in their renewed hope, to begin to share. And that's why you can see the intensity of the fight between the governors and the president is very, very serious because it is a quarrel about who takes custody of the loot.
All right. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Let's come back into the studio now, bring in Mr. Akintobi. Before I get into the meat of the budget to find out how realistic or ambitious the budget is, I mean, with crude oil at $75 per barrel and exchange rate benchmark at 1,500 to the dollar. On a much lighter note, that video that we played where they were all singing on your mandate we shall stand, and when he made the joke about 11th assembly, 10th assembly and made it light, it's caused serious issues on social media. People have picked at the fact that they sang the song saying that it's not an APC assembly. This is the president of the country coming before. These are two different arms of government. The legislative arm, the executive coming before the legislative arm to ensure that there's checks and balances. But we are all acting together like he's one big happy family. Then the other aspect that was raised was the fact that he made a joke about them being re-elected, especially because of the sensitivity with which our democratic system is run, especially taking a look at the 2023 election that was highly contested. The fairness of the election was being contested, and now he makes a joke saying, oh, you all are re-elected. Are these just maybe light-hearted comments that people should overlook, or is that really something to be pointed out?
The issue of the song that was put forward when he was presenting the budget, that shows that we have what we call total legislative capture in this country. Essentially, there's no independence and there's no separation between the executive and the legislature. They're essentially there to do the president's bidding, totally and completely subservient to the president's whims and caprices. And you can tell by the fact that that song is politics. That was campaigning, that was politics. They were there yesterday about the business of the country. There's a separation between politics and governance. But yesterday we saw a mix to where there's no distinction anymore between politics and governance, which is a shame because it means the people's business is being trivialized essentially. And when you see this kind of blind loyalty, I mean, the Senate president in a sonorous voice was so ebullient about belting out these tunes to the point that I would nominate him for a Grammy if I had the power to do so. But I think it's a blight on the people, actually, because those are the people's representatives. If anything at all, they should be singing the national anthem. That is our collective patrimony, and that is what represents us as a people, as a union. But to have singled out the theme song of an individual means essentially you're putting that individual over and above the people you claim to represent. In terms of the president's gaffes, and there were more than the one you pointed out in terms of him getting the assembly wrong. He said 11th instead of 10th. Even his numbers were wrong. He said 47.9 trillion. If you add them up, it actually comes to 49.7. So he transposed the 9 and the 7, which could be fallible, human. You know, you get in front of the camera, you get a bit nervous. He could have been a slip of tongue. I think that when they corrected him on the 10th assembly versus the 11th, he had to be quick on his feet to come up with a retort. So that light-hearted joke, even though I think it was an off-color joke, as you've noted, as you've pointed out, in terms of the fact that we are politically sensitive at this point in time. The 2023 elections did not go down very well with many people, and this government, this administration has been alleged to be leaning autocratically, that some of the decisions they're making, you know, on the very first day, fuel subsidy is gone, you know, parallel market for the naira, which are policies that we're still reeling from 18 months later, that it has autocratic tendencies. So for you to drop a light-hearted joke to say that you're automatically re-elected, meaning that, well, if you're the 10th and I'm saying you're the 11th, that means you're automatically in there the next election. That won't sit well with some people because it speaks to the fact that the party, the APC, would do anything to get its people to be re-elected, to continue in power. So even if it was meant to be a light-hearted moment, it was off-color and definitely won't sit well with a lot of people. And I can imagine what the comments on Twitter streets would be.
Are a lot,
yes, I absolutely can understand why people would feel offended by
You made reference to the policies, talking about the unification of the markets. And what we've seen after that is a steady decline of the naira. Now, with the current exchange rate is much higher than what is being put forward in the budget. So $75 to a barrel, per barrel, $1,500 to a naira. How realistic is this budget, or is it very ambitious?
Well, it is very ambitious, but that's what hope is all about. When you say renewed hope or restoration, the thing about it is that you have to project and project positively. You have to be optimistic.
With the trajectory of how Nigeria has been in the past 2 years, so far, how have our projections helped us? Have we been able to project positively in a way that we then realize that our projection meets up with the reality of what is, and has that then set a yardstick for how we should be able to project in the future?
Well, you set a benchmark and then you strive towards it. I think part of what our issues are is low expectations. And if you have low expectations, then the bar is set so low that you really don't have much to strive for. But if you set the bar very high and you start working towards it, and some of the numbers are unrealistic. But then again, some of the numbers also worry you. Like, for example, this 1,500 naira to a dollar. while it is lower than what obtains now and it shows some optimism, it's also scary because you would think that this government would be striving to get the naira to less than
1,000
1,000.
naira,
Yeah,
at the
1,000 or
very
less.
least.
So essentially telling us that 1,500 is essentially telling us that next year we're still going to be in the doldrums because the exchange rate is still going to be high, things will still be expensive. Look at the contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
1,500 naira to a dollar projected, but you're also saying you're going to bring inflation down to 15%. That's working at cross purposes because it's not possible for naira to be that expensive, and then at the same time it's going to now bring inflation down because we're so dependent on importation at this point. I don't see, well, Port Harcourt refinery has started running. If they can get Warri and Kaduna up and running, that might help things a little bit in terms of the value of the naira vis-a-vis the dollar. But we're dollar dependent, we're import dependent. So if you are pegging the naira at 1,500 to a dollar, I don't see how it's going to help inflation. So we're in for more of the same in the coming year, realistically.
Really? Let me go back to you, Mr. Solomon DeLong. I'd like us to look at two aspects in this conversation. One of it is the fact that many have lauded the president's administration for taking proactive measures in ensuring that underperforming ministers were told to go and new ones were brought in to replace them. What say you about the reappointments of new ministers and the increase in number of appointees, especially during this administration? Do you think it was impactful in the outgoing 2024 year, and do you see it being impactful in 2025?
Well, I don't seem to see anything changing from what has happened. I've said it earlier before, that the cabinet reshufflement was just kicking out orphans of the government who have no parents within the corridor of power, and then they replaced with new ones, and expanding of the number of campaign directors for the president, which he has proved me right in the budget presentation when he now said, well, all of you are automatically re-elected. That is not just a job. The president is telling Nigerians about what will happen in 2027. And I've said this a couple of times, that I don't think from the attitude of this government and the way the governors have conducted the local government elections, Nigerians should look forward to 2027 to change anything, because the president has just confirmed that they were only going to announce themselves return to power. So congratulations, Mr. President. Then about whether the appointment of new ministers and new one will change anything. Look, the president at one point in time said he has started implementation of Orosonya's report after 12 years. That report streamlined agencies of government and matched some. While the president on one breath is implementing that report, which is cutting the cost of governance, every blessed day the government is making new appointments, not more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10. So one tends to wonder, what is the government actually pursuing? Is the government on reforms, or is the government on a jobbery? Because you cannot be talking about cutting the cost of governance. You are expanding the Federal Executive Council, adding more ministers. You are also making appointments every day, even in organizations which you have accepted the report at the Federal Executive Council meeting and said, oh, we are implementing the report that's streamlined. You are making appointments into it. So embarrassing also is the point that they appoint people into some offices today, and then tomorrow they come back out to say, oh, those offices does not exist. So all about what is happening currently is that Nigeria, there is a state capture. Nigerians have been captured by a group of rulers who now see themselves as the country. They define themselves as the country. The resources is meant for them, and there is nothing serious going on, which is indeed quite unfortunate. We had hoped that the president, with his experience, would rather work towards uniting the country. I mean, be more purposeful in economic reforms and be meticulous in the management of the lean resources. There should be physical discipline. But all these remain academic concepts to be discussed by Olive, my brother today, and others on television stations and other social media platforms. For the government, I mean, they are in a world of themselves, and Nigerians are under the jackboot of what my co-discussants refer to as, I mean, dictatorial tendencies. So we're under some form of dictatorial democracy.
Oh,
Are you
Mr. DeLong.
expecting to see more appointments in 2025?
Yeah, in 2025, the president is also still going to reshuffle his cabinet because he will need more campaign directors for this is pronouncement. You are already elected. He needs more people to cover the space, the political space, so that they can capture people. They are also going to be more repressive because the next time if you invite these two gentlemen in your studio, they may walk into the jail. They're not going to be more. They are going to be intolerant to alternative opinions. They are going to recruit more attack dogs into the veranda space of the presidency to make sure that, I mean, everybody is cowed into accepting and singing like the National Assembly has done. So some of us may, from January, begin to learn from the attitude of the National Assembly. Will join the Hallelujah Brigade of the singing, and at the end of the day, maybe they have their way. But just to assure them that it's not going to work in a multicultural political community like Nigeria, the president better brace up and take look at the reality of the situation and try to work for the country instead of this comedy and jokes and gags all over about very serious issue of governance. It's quite disappointing, but of course, he needs to sit up.
All right. I also want to ask you quickly concerning the appointments. Many have said from close quarters that, your colleagues, let me use that for context of this question. I'm talking about the likes of former Sports Minister Sunday Dare has been appointed by the president to be his spokesperson. Not too long ago, we've also seen former Sports Minister as well, Bolaji Abdullahi, also leave the PDP and has joined, or in quotes, has ported to the APC. Many have said that it is because Solomon Dalong has not been given an appointment. That's why he's talking tough against this administration. How true is that? What if you're called tomorrow? Would you also toe the same line like your, in quotes, your colleagues have done?
No, you see, I don't want to demonize those who have accepted to serve, because my understanding of invitation to serve is to serve their country. So I don't want to demonize national service, for trivialities or cheap statement. But for me, I don't seem to see anything I can contribute in this government. So even if I am invited, I will thank the president for inviting me, because we might not be able to operate on the same length. I'm somebody who, with a very toxic mouth, I don't tolerate. Even if I'm in government, I will still have to say my mind. Buhari had to tolerate me for 4 years. So, and I don't see this system accommodating me. So it's all about you having a space and being accommodated. And if you are not going to be accommodated, you're just going to be used and dumped, then certainly you will just be given the El Rufai's vaccine, where President Tinubu, a man who had announced that he was going to retire from politics, President Tinubu then went to economic summit in Kaduna, lured him in, and he went into the ambush. He was nominated, and then within the same government, they generated a security report, and he was kicked out. So if I make that mistake of accepting a nomination under this government, then I will be nominated. Well, I will go for the screening, whatever job they are giving me. At the point of documentation or screening, they will declare me a terrorist, either a member of the Laprawa group, and instead of being appointed, I will be arrested. So I have my common sense. So for those who think that Yeah, I've not been invited. I mean, they should leave in their ignorance. I will not accept to serve this government.
Okay, let's come back to the studio here to speak with Mr. Akintobi. As quickly as you can, I'm going to try and merge two questions into one, and forgive me for doing this because we're running out of time. I want you to speak about the budget allocation. There are those who have applauded the fact that, defense has gotten the allocation that it has. And there are those who say that, no, if CDS says that they've done a great job with fighting insurgency, then maybe we should have channeled this money to agriculture or some other sector so that it can recover from all the losses it's incurred. So that's one. And then the second one, I want you to respond to Mr. Lalong's thoughts regarding you next time coming here and being arrested. Is that a fear that you have about this administration, that you start to clamp down on people more? Okay, did I say more? Clamp down on people in 2025.
Well, without a doubt, journalists, it's been open season on journalists since this administration came into power, and definitely we've seen a lot more, especially the online sector, being picked up for defamation, for saying things against the government. So definitely there's a bit of a concern in the sector, within the practitioners, that how free are we to practice our trade? But I think men of courage populate our sector, and we're not afraid to speak the truth. The truth will always prevail. If what you're saying at the end of the day is what you believe in your heart and mind to be the truth, you will be vindicated at the end of the day. So there's no cause for alarm. I will come here anytime you invite me, and if the security agencies are waiting outside, I'll give them my hands and say, let's go, because I can justify and defend anything I say here or anywhere else. Now, in terms of the budgetary allocation, I think it's good that a lot of money has been allocated to security, because in spite of what the CDS is saying, and in spite of all the money that's been thrown there already, we are still suffering from rampant insecurity in areas of the north central, the northwest. There's still so much insecurity that's affecting farmers' ability to go to the farm. Kidnapping is still rife. So I don't blame the president. I think that is a good move on his part to allocate that much to security. But the key thing is for the money to be spent properly to fight insurgency and to provide security. My biggest worry in terms of the budget is, where's the money coming from? I worry about the deficit that we're going to have to borrow to cover it. I think it's overly optimistic to say they're going to earn X trillion number of naira, which is triple what they earned in 2024. I don't know where the additional money is going to come from. I think there's a gap between expectations and reality.
I mean, if the exchange rate depends, if oil prices, don't match up expectations, how do we balance it out?
And look at Donald Trump coming in America. He's a very anti-climate change, very pro, let's produce more oil. If he gets in there and does all this, then oil prices internationally will drop, which already makes nonsense of all the projections we have done. So there are too many ifs in this for my life.
Too many ifs. Bayo Akintobi, thank you so much for your time with us.
My pleasure always.
And Solomon Dalong, thank you so much for your time with us.
It's my pleasure always.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, it's been quite a conversation this morning, looking at the 2024 journey so far of President Bola Tinubu's administration, as well as what the projections are for 2025. We're going to do much more projections as we proceed with the show, but let's share with you a recap and what's coming up next. This morning on Breakfast Central, President Tinubu presents 49.7 trillion naira 2025 budget to Assembly. And we looked at a bit of the details in that regard. Federal government allocates 4.91 trillion to defense security in 2025 budget. We've also reviewed President Tinubu's road to renewed hope 2024, and in the course of the year, we'll be doing more of that. Now let's share with you what's coming up next.
Coming up next for the 8 o'clock hour, assessing SBM's 2024 review and 2025 forecast. They would be here in the studio to give us a presentation, and you should know about it. Also the front pages of the newspapers, and we'll find out what Nigerians are saying in a moment. Stay with us.
Thank you for joining us on Breakfast Central. We're still looking at some of the big stories, and the papers will share more with us as we take the papers. We'll of course open the phone line so you can get to be a part of the conversation. But now let's share with you what the top stories on the front pages of the newspapers are saying. And our first paper this morning is the Daily Independent newspaper. On the front page of the Daily Independent, 2025 budget of 49.7 trillion. You can see people still carrying the 47.9 trillion that the president said. Of course, it was an error. The calculation revealed that it's 49.7. Defense, education, infrastructure get lion's share of 12.49 trillion. Federal government targets 34.82 trillion in revenue to fund budget, projects 1,500 to dollar, crude oil production of 2,006 million barrels per day. We're not up to 2 million now, so it'll be a miracle. And this is what has made a number of people say that is an ambitious budget, and the argument as to whether it's realistic or not is, one that's been going. Debt servicing to go up 15.81 trillion naira. Budget deficit 13.08 trillion naira. Tinubu says Nigeria generated 14.55 trillion naira revenue in 9 months. PDP describes Tinubu's budget as anti-people. Edo Assembly can't suspend us, local government chairmen say. Now, just to mention that the governor has set up a panel of inquiry, I think an 8-man panel of inquiry to investigate the local government chairmen, seen as they refuse to send their financial reports. CUPP exposes plots to frame up Ugochinyere, slam him with treason charges. Wow. Okay. Tinubu okays executives for River Basin Development Authorities. Afenifere calls for immediate unconditional release of Farotimi. That's how Farotimi's case has, in a way, quote-unquote, died down, and it just seems like he's been there, and that's the Nigerian thing. It feels like people make noise, and after a while, everybody gets quiet and moves on to another story. Our task is to intimidate, take over Oyo in 2027, Ganduje boasts. National Assembly won't kill tax reform bills, says Akpabio. Confusion in civil service over plan to reverse AGF's appointment. And final story, federal government okays 161 million euros, $750 million investments to expand electricity access. And that's all on the front page of the Daily Independent. Let's now move over to our next paper.
All right, the next paper happens to be Punch this morning. And on the Punch newspapers, we'll take a look at this story. Oni's ex-wife, others face probe as 32 children feared killed. We did take that story this morning. If we can, we'll also put up the videos just in case you missed out on what's really happening. It was a children's fun fair, so to put it, an event that took place there in Oyo State, but it didn't go well because the event was planned for 5,000 children, but it was obvious that the numbers indeed, if not doubled, tripled, and that's exactly what you have. So many persons were in tears because a lot of parents could not help but shed tears seeing that their children were gone, in other words, dead. We'll try as much as possible to ensure that we can depict that image for you in terms of video. There were amateur videos that were circulating or in circulation yesterday concerning that event. Very sad. Very sad. Well, UCH, 2 others confirmed 16 deaths. Makinde vows justice, sympathizes with parents. I do wonder how the organizers who worked with the Oni's ex-wife would be feeling now as of this morning. Well, anyway, sometimes, Olive, it reminds me of the statement when they say, don't just say, if I'm going to speak to professional event planners and those who have been engaging in doing events for years, let me not put myself in the picture though, but let me find someone else. Okay, let's say if you call the popular names. Part of the key things you look at, like I did say early in the morning, is you have to look at the structure of your event. You look at carefully, you take out to look at the number of people you're expecting. You also look at the plans you do have, the floor plan. You look at the security, you look at the health, you look at danger. You must always factor in what if there's any danger. And I think that in that case where you saw that the numbers had increased, it would have been good to have turned some people back and say, oh, sorry, we're full. That's why some events you go to, you hear, oh, we're filled up, no space. The space is filled up. Even in smaller lounges, smaller event spaces that are open to the public, sometimes when you try to approach these event spaces, or let's say a lounge, a popular lounge, they say, oh, sorry, we're fully booked. Yeah, we're fully booked. It's very key because these things also enhances security. But this is sad, like I've rightly said. Federal government plans 13 trillion naira loan as Tinubu presents 49.7 trillion naira 2025 budget. Gridlock grounds Lagos Ibadan Expressway's driver dies in crash. I did see image of that yesterday. Not too good. Too many accidents. I think we need to be more careful. Maybe our roads, we need to put up a lot of signs again so we can... there should be orientation put out there, especially for using the media as a means. This is talking to the FRSC and the likes. Send these messages, run these adverts. You could have a partnership, a CRM, a CRS, I beg your pardon, corporate social responsibility, and let Nigerians know. Because if you drum roll it into their ears, you drum it all the time, even when they're driving, they would take note of that. Especially during the Yuletide season, we see a lot of accidents because people engage in drinking and driving and the likes. Anyway, AGF to meet Senate panel on tax reform bills today. That takes place today. AGF, Attorney General of the Federation, will meet the Senate panel on tax reform bills today. So a lot of expectations. People are hoping that the tax reform bills would be finally put to rest and then it can proceed to the next level. And bear in mind that the President's presentation, the 2025 budget for the fiscal year, is also hinged as well on the tax reform bills. So that's another thing Nigerians need to know, which kind of like means, regardless of whatever may be said, that reforms bills must be passed. PSC promotes over 8,000 police officers. Cash scarcity, OPS folds CBN's limit on POS withdrawals. And Saraki Plateau Governor, North Central bigwigs demand PDP chairman's slot. That's all I'm going to take on the front page of the Punch.
All right, now let's move to the Daily Times newspaper. On the front page of the Daily Times, Tinubu presents 49.7 trillion naira 2025 budget as defense, infrastructure, health, education take big shares. We also have here Thursday tourism okay, all right. At the top of the paper, we have President Tinubu arrives Lagos for festive holidays. Tinubu approves management for river basin authorities. Tinubu presents 49.7 trillion naira budget of restoration before joint section of National Assembly. We will not kill tax reform bill, says National Assembly. And then we also have here 2024 budget implementation extended to June 2025. These are the stories this morning on Breakfast Central. So do let us know what your thoughts are. We'll open the phone lines as we start to discuss the conversations this morning on Breakfast Central. You want to refer to a story?
Yeah, sure. I think, anyway, before we go to the next paper, I think there's a story here that's also very key. It's got to do with the National Assembly stating that they will not kill the tax reform bills. And today would also prove to be that day where Nigerians would equally get to find out if the tax reform bills will indeed pass the final reading and then implementation. Yesterday we did talk about implementation being Nigeria's biggest problems in terms of policies, in terms of laws. I mean, take a look at the judiciary itself. We've seen how there are certain laws that have been put in place under the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but yet it seems like these laws are not being followed. That also brings to mind the need for implementation, which happens to be a major problem. And that's hopeful that we'll not see the same with the tax reform bills. But National Assembly says they will not kill the tax reform bill, so we hope that they would stick to that statement. But today the AGF would be there to carry on the presentation. Let's hope that all would be, well and good. Well,
all right, so many other stories there. I think also just to quickly touch on there was a story I saw earlier. Yes, just to quickly touch on the Edo Assembly story again. The governor has appointed a team to investigate this story and to investigate the local government chairman. Yesterday we had the conversation and we had two lawyers, Towo Oserowoja and we had Andre Nwata, talk to us about the legality or otherwise of the governor's actions. Is the governor, did he have the right to fire or to suspend, fire is not the word, to suspend the local government chairman? I mean, this is something that we've seen play in different parts of the country. We saw something similar in River State with the local government chairman, and people would ask, Does the executive have this power? Is that your power? Is the power vested in you as the executive? And in terms of setting up committees to investigate them, do you have that power? There's checks and balances for a reason. And, you know, part of the argument we heard was that the local government chairman should be accountable to the councils, you know, and these are the people who should question them and the people that they're representing as well. Not in this case the governor, but others would argue, those would argue otherwise. And the conversation about the court judgment in July and what that means in terms of granting local governments financial autonomy and the implementation of that. I remember we had another conversation with Mr. Wale Ajayi, I think it was the day before that, and he said, for that Supreme Court judgment to kick into effect, we'll have to go back and review the Constitution, because at the end of the day, it's granting autonomy on paper, but the implementation of it is another different, it's a totally different kettle of fish. But yeah, that's one story that will be taken, and as we get more updates on that, we will keep talking about this. Faratimi is still in custody. Afenifere has called for his immediate unconditional release. And I think the question is, do you think it was going to last this long? And if you'd like to contribute to any of this, please call us. The numbers to call are on your TV screen. Did you think that Dele Faratimi was going to be this long in detention?
I would say nobody thought it would take this long. As a matter of fact, many have said that what's happening now is what was partly mentioned in the book. And like we rightly said, the judiciary was placed, especially in front of every single Nigerian's eye. Judiciary was indeed put on a balance to see if they will be able to weigh in professionally, especially in handling issues or cases like this. We've heard different interpretations in terms of what defamation of character, defamation of the person simply is, especially with what he wrote in the book, and how it has circulated not just locally but internationally, and therefore it required stringent measures to be taken. But then again, Nigerians have also continued to ask, there's something that is bigger than that defamation. Many have said it's freedom of speech. Yes, you could also quote the former president of Uganda, Idi Amin, who says, of course, you have a freedom of speech.
Freedom after the speech
but freedom after speech, we don't know what it says. But that's an individual. We wouldn't want to refer to that, because today everybody seems to be more enlightened when it comes to the type of policies that we practice, and also in terms of politics, which happens to be democracy. But then again, if we look at what is going on with Dele Faratimi, you would start to wonder, okay, fine, what do the law, or what does the law say, and how does it benefit an average Nigerian who decides to speak up? Olive, don't forget again that just yesterday, we did see a video trending of parents who came on a podcast to say that the governor of a state finally decided to let their child off the hook from being hung or being hung in the snooze, so to say, because of stealing fowl, what we call chicken. And that got Nigerians even more angrier, in the sense that they went on social media. If we're going to tabulate all of these things, looking at Dele Faratimi's case, I think it's high time that judiciary should sit down. I mean, it's also a call to the Chief Justice of Nigeria. I was expecting that there would be an address very soon after her appointment, but I want to believe that she's working behind closed doors, possibly putting all cases before herself or before the table, and calling her team to look at it carefully and say, you know what, we need a restructuring or a reform. I mean, you're a lawyer as well, so I'm sure you understand what I'm saying in terms of how different laws are interpreted in different parts of Nigeria. We've talked about that of Benin. We've also mentioned Dele Faratimi. We've talked about that of the former governor, who was said to have stolen XYZ amount with proof from a body, an independent body known as the EFCC, whose job is to investigate. And they proved it. They said these are evidences that he paid his children's school fees from the government's coffers. And now you ask, okay, after all the proof, what happened?
Well,
500 million naira bill, and hands were being shaken, and everybody was smiling. Case closed.
Anyway, I think the final story I just wanted to highlight, because I went to look into the details of the story. CUPP exposes plot to frame up Ogunchinyere and slam him with treason charges. So this is the coalition of united,
coalition of united
political parties. They've raised an alarm over alleged clandestine scheme allegedly by security agencies to frame their spokesman, Ogunchinyere. They say that they want to, they've described it as a fabricated, concocted, and criminal defamation, treason, and other concocted criminal offenses against him, saying that it was aimed to silence the lawmaker. We know that Ogunchinyere has been very vocal. In cases where you expect the PDP to speak and nobody is speaking up, Ogunchinyere will speak up.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean...
Especially in the Rivers crisis.
Yes. Oh, he spoke a lot in the Rivers crisis. Yeah. He's talked about a number of things, you know, but I guess in the coming days, weeks, we will see how things eventually turn out. That's all that we have this morning on the papers. We'll go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be speaking with the men who see tomorrow. I'm talking about SBM Intelligence. Stay with us. Welcome back. SBM Intelligence has released its annual report assessing the accuracy of its 2024 predictions about the Nigerian economy and offering a comprehensive forecast for 2025. The report strategically analyzes Nigeria's socio-economic and political landscape alongside trends across the African continent. Among its key projections, SBM projects mixed economic outlook for Nigeria in 2025. The report forecasts oil prices to remain stable between $65 and $75 per barrel, with crude production expected to rise to 1.8 million barrels per day. However, this figure falls short of the government's ambitious 2 million barrel target, hindered by ongoing issues such as oil theft, militancy, and infrastructure deficits.
Well, don't forget that the economy is projected to grow by 3.5% in 2025, supported by easing fiscal and monetary shocks, and inflation is expected to remain high at 28%. SBM also predicts a continued upward trend in Nigeria's external reserves, surpassing $40 billion, driven by reduced import bills from local refining activities. However, let's also tell you that the naira is likely to face further devaluation, with exchange rates potentially exceeding 2,000 naira to a dollar by the end of the year. What year are they talking about? Is it 2024 or 2025? Well, this presentation or this part of Breakfast Central is very key, especially looking at the fact that the #1 citizen, President Bola Tinubu, did his presentation yesterday at the Joint Assembly, and projections were equally made. But anyway, joining us to analyze these projections is partner and head of research at SBM Intelligence, Ikemi Sitefeong, joins us live in the studio. Good to have you here this morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. If we're to go about everything that's been said here, I'm sure a lot of Nigerians are saying, okay, here they go again, they are talking too much. Can they at least make it as simple as possible for us to understand? So let's start off first. What are the forecast projections, and just break it down for us in simple terms.
Okay, sure. And thanks for putting me under pressure by mentioning that I'm following up the president's presentation with mine.
No, but
yeah.
you wouldn't say we're the, what assembly are we in?
Wow,
yeah.
Johansson.
I'm just.
Well, I'm seeing one good news here, I think.
Okay.
$65 and $75 per barrel. I think that's in line with the projection, the benchmark that the new budget, the 2025 budget has. Is that good news for you?
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about the fact that oil prices right now have stayed in that $70 to $75 per barrel band, despite all that has been happening in the world, the war in Ukraine, obviously the conflict in Gaza, what we've seen in Syria, the relative escalation, then de-escalation between Israel and Iran, crude prices have actually been very resilient. And so for us, we don't see much upside in terms of any sort of major geopolitical developments really affecting crude prices significantly. That's why we think that 65 to 75 band accounts for sort of like the best as well as the worst case scenarios in terms of what kind of global geopolitical developments could move oil prices. So we typically do this every year. Okay. We have a yearly report where we look back at the reports that our forecast from heading into the new year, and we make projections towards 2025. We generally try to score ourselves. We made what was it? Something like 46 forecasts, right? Heading into 2024, we got 31 of those correct, 12 were wrong, a couple were partially correct. Pass rates of, something like 67%, which is in line with the average that we'll typically get.
So that means your crystal ball is really.
We try. That there's a lot of brain work that goes into it, and we'll typically look at things like the economy. So heading into this administration's first full year, we made projections as to GDP growth, what the pace of reform would be, the conversation around tax reform being very critical right to this. And we actually called it and said that, reforms or the efforts at reform will push ahead, but the pace will be a bit slower. In terms of GDP growth, we projected a 3 to 3.2%. That's largely been in line with what we've seen on a quarter-by-quarter basis as released by the SBM, by the MBS. So that was good. The CBN had a big, this was supposed to be a marquee milestone year in terms of financial inclusion, right? Something like 95% of Nigerians are supposed to have been financially included by 2024. This target was set circa 2017, 2018. Very, very long way to go in terms of getting there. And actually, some of the new regulations around limiting POS withdrawal transactions, more regulation on the line for fintechs, right, mean that we have actually extended the runway in terms of getting to 95% financial inclusion. We expected the MPR, the monetary policy rates, to be sub 20%, but the CBN has gone on these aggressive rate hiking measures. So obviously, we didn't get that correct. We called inflation being above 27% for the most part this year. The CBN, as well as the president in the aforementioned presentation, think that the MPR, right, will head in a general direction, which would still keep it right in the low to mid 20%. So that's actually a projection that we've rolled over right into this year. Fuel subsidies. Remember in mid 2024, there was that conversation about, do we have subsidies? Are there no subsidies and all of that? But I think it's pretty clear to everyone now when you look at both the landing cost of fuel for the petrol that we still import into the country, plus the ex-depot price, right? That has come out from the now in-force Dangote refinery, that there is still some kind of subsidy, right, going on. If we can flip the charts up to the next page as well. Just a few things I wanted to highlight. In fact, we could go to the 2025 predictions so that we can talk a bit about what's going on in the future. That would be great. We did mention a couple of things around security, especially security in the FCT, poverty, unemployment, and inflation, obviously, meaning that we may begin to see social tensions and some protests, particularly in northern Nigeria. And we saw all of that pan out. We called the Ghana election, we called the South Africa election, the ANC losing.
What did you say about the Ghana election?
Oh, we said that the NDC would win.
Ah.
Right, yes. I'm actually quite proud of that.
Wait. You actually predicted that John Dramani was going to win?
Yeah.
And that came true?
Yeah, it did. I mean, to be fair, the outgoing MPP had a lot of, sort of economic as well as corruption headwinds, right? Really not stacked up in their favor. So maybe it was a relatively easy call. But
so I think that we can see that a number of you had more correct projections than incorrect projections.
Correct.
ECOWAS did not reach an accommodation with the Nigerian regime. That's the one thing.
If anything, the opposite has happened.
Exactly.
They've left ECOWAS. Right, yeah. So
let's
that's
move away
really
from here now and see what the 2025 expectations are.
Okay, yeah. So in your introduction, you had already called out crude prices, and we've already had that conversation. Part of the reason why we think crude will remain this way is because we think the OPEC Plus alliance, right? OPEC Plus Russia will not get its act together. Saudi Arabia wants to curb production in order to release that downward pressure on fuel prices. Donald Trump heading into the White House is a fan of lower gas prices. Yeah, obviously, Russia wants to sell as much oil as possible, and it's sanctioned, and so it's having to use backhand channels to sell to countries like India and China. So on the whole, we think crude production globally, right, will actually slightly increase and demand may not match up with it, and that will keep prices relatively muted. Nigeria wants to increase to 2 million barrels per day. We don't necessarily think it will get to that. 1.8 is a good number. We have done 1.8 in a few months this year, right? So we think that that's an achievable baseline, especially compared to 3 years ago when we were just doing 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, right? And I think that's that. If you can have the next chart, that would also be great. We think that the increased Chinese presence in the Nigerian economy will even become more pronounced, right, in 2025. You've seen them make significant inroads into fintech, into e-commerce with the launch of Temu in Nigeria. Obviously,
that's new, and they're making so much noise on that as well.
Yeah, pretty much. And then the acquisition of Lafarge Africa, right, by one of China's biggest cement manufacturers. There's the opportunity for more deals in the oil and gas space, and we think that there are some Chinese players who will take advantage of that as well. We think our external reserves will reach 40 billion, although the naira management policy, which we've seen come into place, may actually be a risk item for this. But we think on the whole, there's enough upside for us to do 40 billion. We think inflation will come down largely because of base effects. We think like the real upside in terms of the rate of increase in prices has already happened. And so price increases will happen at a slower rate. A lot of demand, which has been curtailed because of increased prices, right, means that a lot of producers within the economy will not have a lot more space to increase prices further. So that's why we think inflation will come down.
I'm seeing here your projection of naira to depreciate to above 1,000 naira to 2,000 naira to a dollar in 2025.
Yeah, so the US dollar is strengthening, and just yesterday the US Fed cut interest rates by 25 basis points. Usually what the net effect of that, right, is for the dollar to strengthen relative to other currencies. And this is whether the advanced currencies like the euro, the pound, or emerging currencies like amongst other currencies, right, the naira. So we think with the kind of policies that the Donald Trump administration, right, will institute, the potential for more interest rate hikes from the US Fed next year, there's almost nothing that the CBN or domestic policymakers would do. The naira would just weaken, just as every other currency would. And we think since we are already at the parallel market, right, we're touching 1650, 1670, sometimes it gets into the 1700s. We think the net effect of that is we could easily cross the 2000 mark. We may not stay there, we may eventually come down
again, but that's a bit scary as well, even though I do also see in one of your points here that there would be investors would indeed, see value in our stock market, especially looking at Q1, Q2. I think a lot of investors are interested, now that the president has presented a budget, we'll look like looking at what Q1 would bring.
Pretty much so. So a lot of portfolio investors already find Nigerian assets relatively cheap. Again, especially if you're from a foreign investor's standpoint, right? You don't really need to have a lot of dollars in order to chase Nigerian assets just because of where the differential, right, on the currency is. So that has made Nigerian assets, plus obviously the very substantial yields, oftentimes in the 18 to 20%, which you will not find in any advanced economy. We think for the short term, it makes sense for a lot of portfolio investors to pile into Nigerian assets. And I should say the one extra layer of looking at where the currency rate is that if you're a Nigerian exporter, this is actually relatively good for you, because what that means is your potential, just by virtue of the currency differential when you export, will be a lot more when you repatriate those FX revenue, right, back into the country and you convert it into naira. Right?
Okay, because we're running out of time, let's quickly look at the political expectations for 2025.
Oh, yes. So the conversation around reforms right now, what we're seeing with the caucus, right, within the National Assembly, which is vociferously anti, right, the tax reforms, we think that may form the makings, right, of an alternative opposition caucus within the All Progressives Congress. That conversation is already starting.
I think you also had a similar projection like this last year, but that did not.
It didn't pan out because we actually thought it would crystallize this year. It hasn't. But we think that because the reform agenda really kicked off much later in the year than we anticipated, right? A lot of that opposition and the potential for that to lead to political breakaways will most likely happen in 2024.
Number 2.
I want to skip the
Please,
weekend.
let's quickly. No, you can't skip that.
Yeah, I want to, but we had a mini cabinet reshuffle, right? And a lot of our sense was that it was going to be a more substantial reshuffle than we eventually saw. Projection number 1 actually fits to projection number 2, which is that if a lot of that political instability is going to be the last full year before our politicians really begin to think about the elections, right? 2026 will be the preparation to 2027, as it were. The upside for a substantial cabinet reshuffle and for the FCT minister to not remain in office is very high. That's why we went out on a limb and called that. I'm pretty sure there are many people who would hold that. Yes, despite all of this, right, the organized political opposition may not necessarily get their acts together. We still don't expect that a formal alliance, which would put either the PDP and the Labour Party in a combined role in a much stronger position to oppose the APC, will occur in 2025, despite how we saw the absence of that. We saw how the absence of that whittled their chances back in 2023. There's an election in Anambra. We expect the former CBN governor to get a second term in office, despite all the whispers and noises around his track record. And we expect the current National Security Advisor to take a more prominent role, right, in government for reasons that are more political than sort of substantive. So it's not necessarily going to be on the basis of his track.
So how many predictions are there for politics? 1, 2, 3,
4, 5, 6. I think there are a couple of them. Yeah.
Okay, let's quickly touch on security because we're out of time.
Okay.
We have 2 minutes more.
In terms of security, we think a lot of the Al-Qaeda back groups, Lekwawa, a lot of those other groups that are more jihadist oriented, that Islamic State is still funneling and supporting, will play a more prominent role in the security landscape, particularly in the northwest and in central portions of Nigeria. Despite what's going on in Finland with Simon Ekpa's imminent conviction, we still see the upside for IPOB-related violence in the southeast.
Unfortunately, I think that I may agree with this because, I don't know, it's just like cutting off the head and a new one grows. I don't know if they've gotten to the root cause of the problem. It's not just about arresting the leaders. We saw that with Nnamdi Kanu and the ones before him. Yeah. You keep arresting and then new leaders keep springing
It's
up.
a momentum play. It's like the ball has been set rolling. So irrespective of which leader is arrested or is cut off the frame, there's still a microcosm, right, of discontent on the ground. We've talked about there's also a rebound prediction here. The security situation, we think, will become a more present and prescient conversation politically, and that's where some of his track record may come into play. And we're seeing an uptick in gang-related violence, especially amongst young people, right, in many parts of the country. But one part of the country where we expect the youth gang crisis to actually taper off is Edo State, which, if you have any context as to what the security situation like in Edo over the last 5 years, is a pretty bold call. But we think because the political temperature has come down a bit, they are very important gang leaders, for the lack of a better word, who are also politically connected, and a lot of their people are in power. We think that that will put downward pressure on security in that
Okay,
state.
I think we have one more slide,
Okay, so in terms of the rest of Africa, we see inflation in Ghana ending next year around 18%. It's now in the low 20s, so that's important.
That's quite lower than Nigeria's, eh?
Wow.
Yeah.
So we're going to see more migration of Nigerians to Ghana.
It's much lower. It's much lower than that, but Ghanaians will still tell you that it's still quite expensive, right, to do that. Ghana is also going to be one of those countries where the currency is going to be hammered by what Trump and other developments in the US, right, will go on. So that's maybe the downward pressure on inflation may be offset by weakness in the currency. There will be interesting things happening in Ghanaian politics, right, as well. The John Mahama administration has already appointed 5 people to lead what it calls an anti-corruption probe right now in Ghana. And we know that some of the people that they'll be going after will be cabinet members, under the Nana Akufo administration. The Electoral Commission chief is also on the block. Ghana's Chief Justice, right, is also on the block. So a lot of the political machinations there in Ghana may actually dominate the conversation a bit more than security. We expect another coup attempt in Burkina Faso. Côte d'Ivoire goes to elections next year. We think it's going to be a rematch between Gbagbo and Ouattara. Yes, but we think Ouattara gets a second term, the incumbency advantage and all of that, and it's not really done badly.
And you're thinking that in South Africa, Julius Malema's hold will be reduced?
Oh yes, very much so. There's a lot of discontent, right, within a substantial portion of the rank and file within the EFF. We think because Jacob Zuma's MK party now has a substantial representation in power, he basically holds the ace cards. Ideologically, both of those parties are on the same side of the political spectrum in South Africa, so we expect some, we expect some cross-carpeting, right, as it was, not just in Nigeria, that happens. And then in Gabon, the military currently runs it now. A referendum this year, we think, the referendum which happened last month will eventually pave the way for elections next year, and we think that the current military leader will transition, as a lot of these leaders tend to becoming an elected president. Next door, there are elections in Cameroon. We actually didn't include this, but we don't expect the status quo to change that much. But on our western border in Benin, there's been a slow uptick in Islamist attacks, especially in its north and its central regions. A lot of it flow through from northwest Nigeria and Burkina Faso and Niger. We expect that to increase next year. And unfortunately, the civil war in Sudan, which we should be talking about a lot more, right? But many other things are happening in the world. We expect, this is a carryover from last year, didn't pan out in terms of the permanent ceasefire, but we think that there will be a ceasefire, but Chad will get involved, and a lot of the insecurity in that particular country will be concentrated around the shared border between Chad and Sudan.
Very interesting. Can you tell us when you're going to is this out? Is it on your website?
And this goes out today.
Today?
Yes.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
So you have first dibs.
So many,
Great.
and I'm sure that in the course of the next few months, we can start to review and see which ones will pan out and which ones won't. But thank you so much for sharing your SBM Intelligence crystal ball with us. I'm sure that people are shaking. I think the most controversial one in the political space would be the Nyesom Wike one.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Especially here in Nigeria. Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
This is where we wrap things up here on Breakfast Central. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll be back again on tomorrow. I wanted to say on Mondays, as if I'm already in the weekend mode. But we look forward to having you join us and continue the conversations with us at New Central TV on our social media platforms. Until we'll come your way again tomorrow, I am Olive Emodi.
And I'm Joe Hansen. Thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow. Bye.
Au revoir.